Scenario 3. This is the scenario I created. So, a sports scientist wants to test the power of young British gymnasts. To do this, a researcher uses the Wingate test, the test for anaerobic power. Before the test, the gymnast had to have a health screening that was specific to the exercise. One of the gymnasts had a bad case of asthma. Knowing this, the researcher advised the gymnast not to take part. The gymnast still wanted to do it, so they had to sign a disclaimer saying that it was their choice to take part, and if they get harmed, it was at their own risk. During the exercise, the gymnast had an asthma attack. The researcher then terminated the test. So, for this, it is good practice that the researcher had the subject sign a disclaimer form, because then the researcher is not legally accountable for what could happen, because they signed a form which tells them the risks of what could happen and made sure they knew. It's also good practice that the researcher did a health screening so that they know about the participant. This way they could know if they had any medical conditions or injuries, and it would be bad practice if one wasn't held or wasn't detailed, because this could mean that the participant could get injured and the researcher would be at risk of consequences. And also it would be bad practice because the researcher wouldn't know if the participant had any conditions at all unless they did this, and then they're legally accountable for them. The consequences for this would depend on the severity of the illness or injury that the client has to begin with, and if it is made worse during the testing. For instance, if there was a minor injury that was sustained, for instance, the client had a knee condition and then it only slightly hurts afterwards, but the researcher didn't hold health screening before that and it hurt afterwards, but it's a not very severe injury, the researcher might need to have supervision in future circumstances that they held research to make sure it doesn't happen again. They would also could get a suspension, so they would have to be out for a bit of time and learn about what's good and bad practice, and they could also get a fine. This would happen if it isn't a severe injury. If it is, the researcher could go to prison for unsafe practice on the participant. For instance, if the client had a heart condition and a health screening wasn't done and they had a heart attack or heart palpitations after and had to go to the hospital, then the researcher could get sued and could get a prison sentence as well. They would also lose all credibility that they got from bases, which would be bad for their career. If the client said they wanted to continue though, even if they have a condition but they sign a disclaimer, then the researcher isn't held accountable for what happens after that, because they advised the participant not to do it and they held a health screening so they knew all the rules, everything that's wrong, and also the researcher would be extra aware and would be more cautious and could pull the test at any time. Another thing would be if the researcher didn't do a risk-benefit analysis, then it shouldn't be approved by the ethics committee. If it is, the research is unnecessary and the researcher could be supervised for research in the future. And if the subject gets injured, then the researcher could get fired or lose their credibility bases because of unsafe practice, so they'd lose all their credibility. Therefore, they wouldn't be as reliable to get jobs as well. If the subject's injury is severe, they could go to prison or get fined a large sum of money. This is because they could psychologically or physically damage the participant, and they need to have a large consequence for that, so they won't do it again. In good practice, the researcher would think of all the reasons for doing the research before going to the ethics committee so that they won't have to redo it. It is also the researcher's responsibility to ensure the safety of all the people involved. This means that they should have to make sure all the equipment is safe and also that they have done all the checks on the participant to continue. Bad practice would be if the researcher made it the client's job to warm up and cool down and not supervise it because the client might not know how to do that properly, and then they wouldn't have a proper warm up and then they could get injured, and that would be the researcher's fault for doing that. And if the researcher didn't check all the equipment beforehand and didn't oversee what the participant was doing, that is bad practice because the participant could get injured, and it's the researcher's job to make sure and check all the equipment is suitable for use before it is being tested on. And the consequences for this could be a fine, or they could have to be they could have to go get ethical training because they need to redo this and make sure that they don't do it again in the future when they test on people. And they could also get fired or suspended if any injury comes to anyone working on the team, including other staff that they have around, if any of them get injured due to anything that the researchers should have done. So check all the equipment, make sure everything's working, and if they get injured, then that's also the researcher's fault. And yeah, it is also the researcher's responsibility to debrief the participants. Good practice would be if they told the subject exactly who they were going to do, what they were going to do at the beginning, and also the end. They should know the information, know what the information is being used for, how the information is being collected, where it's happening, who are the people involved that are doing the testing, and also any other questions that they want to ask as well. They should know exactly what tests they're doing before they start the research whatsoever. Bad practice would be if the researcher didn't explain what they were doing before the testing, and they tested first and then the participants signed the papers. This is bad because the participant needs to know exactly what they are signing up for. So it needs to be in detail, because otherwise that is deception by omission, because they're not being told the information that they want to know and what they're signing up for, and they don't know what their information is being used for either, which they should know before anything happens. So the researcher needs to explain exactly what they're testing and why. It's also important that they debrief the subjects at the end so that they know what the information is being used for, how tests went at the end, and so that they know their information is being used correctly and isn't being given out to anyone who is going to share it at all. It is also important to make sure they're okay with their information being used after the session, because they may have changed their mind, which they have the right to at any point, but the researcher needs to know that they're okay with the information being shared before they share it. And they should also be aware of what each test does as well, so what the equipment does before they get on it and the safety procedures for it. And it is also important that the researcher lets them know which ones are necessary to be performed and don't make them do anything that isn't particularly necessary and could be done in a different, safer way if possible. So it needs to be safe as well. So the debrief is a very important part, because that will tell the research is necessary and the participant knows exactly what's happening throughout the test as well. It is very important that the researcher terminated the test when the gymnast had an asthma attack, so they weren't feeling well, and they stopped straight away because the participant was at risk. So that was good practice in what they were doing. And also the consequences for not giving a debrief could mean that the client gets injured. So there could be ethical training that is needed, a fine, or a suspension. This is because if they didn't get injured too badly, or if the researcher wasn't too clear, they would just need some ethical training so that they know what to do next time they were doing it. And they may need supervision just to make sure that they're holding all the research correctly as well.